Wonderful. And we're
All right,
recording.
Lincoln
So just a
Snyder.
reminder to everyone, we are recording. We will be sharing this later. So just housekeeping note, if everybody could be sure to mute their microphones, and we'll get started in 30 seconds. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lincoln Snyder, and I am President and CEO of the National Catholic Educational Association. Very grateful you could join me today for us to have a conversation around Gen Z and mental health, what you need to know. Just a bit about NCEA. So we're one of your co-hosts today, and we're in the Diocese of Arlington, but not of the Diocese of Arlington. So we're the National Association for All Catholic Schools. We have 5,900 members, and we've been around for 120 years this year. So our job is to support the Catholic educators and the school ministries in serving 1.7 million students, grades preschool through 12th grade in all of our Catholic schools nationally. And so today I was hoping to take a few moments to talk to you about student mental health. These are really, really tough times to be a kid. And during this brief 50-minute presentation, I wanted to bring to your attention a couple of trends that I think are really worth noting for all of us as the grown-ups in support of our students and our children, and then have a chance to answer any questions you might have on these or other topics. So for this first bit, which is called You Should Be Concerned, I'm presenting some data that we got from the Jordan Elizabeth Harris Foundation that focuses in particular on suicide prevention. And so these are very well documented, well vetted trends coming from public health data that are in many ways a little bit contradictory on the face of it, but there's really important things to discuss for us below the surface. So, first of all, the slide I'm starting with shows that some risky behaviors are declining amongst our youth, and they have been for years. And so if you look from 2011 to 2021, with all sorts of indications of risky behaviors for our kids, things like whether or not they've ever had intercourse, or if they've had multiple partners, or if they're currently active, etc. These numbers are all going down and going down significantly. They were pretty stable for the baby boom through right through Gen X and even into the early millennial generation. But with Gen Z, these risky behaviors are declining, and you can see that from the numbers here. So, for example, children are waiting longer, and all in all, this is a good thing, of course. But what we're going to see is not because this is driven by some sort of uptick in virtuous behavior. There's some deeper things below the surface here that are at play for us. We're also seeing the good news of declining drug and alcohol abuse. And so for students who consume alcohol, that's way down. It's not because they're consuming more things like marijuana, that's down too. We're seeing a decline in illicit drugs. We're seeing all of these really risky, dangerous, damaging behaviors go down and go down significantly and quickly. So, for example, alcohol consumption is dropping very quickly for our youth. Um, and females are actually consuming at a higher rate than males right now. And we do see some differences amongst genders as we look at these numbers. Same thing with marijuana use, actually declining. One of the concerns that we hear a lot as educators is that things like bullying incidents or violence at schools is on an uptick. And actually, the statistics don't support that. Now, we see more kids not going to school because they're concerned about safety. That's up from 6% to 9%. But in terms of percentages of actually things happening at school, for example, a student being threatened or injured with a weapon, being bullied electronically or otherwise, we see that our in-person bullying is down. Electronic bullying is reported as fairly steady. And violence in other forms is more or less at the same rates as well. So we see an uptick in concerns, and we're going to talk about this, but an actual decrease in a lot of these violent or bullying behaviors too. So all in all, these are good things for our students. So I think that, of course, children not engaging in these high risk behaviors is a point of reflection for us because it does mean that the decline in the negative behaviors results in better outcomes, all things being even. But what I want to share with you today is not all things are even for us today. So the biggest change for us that we see is a decline in mental health, and this is a huge point of concern. So if you look at these leading indicators, for example, students experiencing persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness, up from 28% to 42% in 10 years. 29% report they're experiencing poor mental health. 22% of students have reported they've seriously considered attempting suicide. 18% of American youth have actually made a plan. 10%, a full 10% have attempted suicide. And 3% of our students have been injured in an attempt that required medical treatment. So this is an explosion in mental health concerns just at the same time that other points of risky behavior are going down. This is the most concerning slide for me as we break this out too, is that what percentage of students, high school students nationally who have attempted suicide, we see a much higher rate of attempting suicide amongst females than males. We see that amongst races and ethnicities, there's not as much differentiation as between the sexes. But some groups certainly are more at risk of a suicide attempt than others. So are there any questions about any of these things before I go into start talking about things that we draw from this or lessons or conclusions? Any questions about the data themselves that you might want to ask? So as we talk about a mental health crisis, I think it's very fair to call it that. And I want to start by talking about two different ways to view it. One is what can we do with the acute challenges of the moment? And then what can we do with these longer term or chronic challenges that are related to mental health? First of all, we see that declining mental health and suicidal ideation are at numbers that are terrifyingly high for us as the adults that love and serve these children in our schools and in our families. And so I think the first and most important thing is every school needs to have a comprehensive suicide prevention plan and training in place. Part of the good news is that there are programs that can be accessed. The Harris Foundation, from whom I borrowed these data, have some programs in place. There's many nationally that have services and training programs in place for the adults. They also teach a lot of universal indicators that help adults identify high-risk behaviors among students beyond suicidal ideation. This next point is really important. They're just being teenagers or just being dramatic. I think that what you've seen from this data is this is a generation that has a very different risk profile than we did as Gen Xers or baby boomers, even as older millennials. This is a different time to be a child, and it's a difficult time to be a child. So don't write any of this off as just being dramatic. Finally, for us as educators and as parents, making sure that mental health referrals are not punitive is at the core of what we do. More and more children need this assistance, and we need to make sure that it's offered in a safe and supportive way. So much gratitude to our friends from the Jordan Elizabeth Harris Foundation, from whom I've borrowed these data. For the next part of the presentation, I wanted to talk about what can we do when we consider that this mental health crisis is really a chronic problem. These challenges have been evolving for years. They've been years in the making, and they are a result of many different factors at play. So we've been working against a broader context in which society has changed and changed very quickly. And COVID accentuated many of these trends. So the things that were already fragile really became much more problematic during COVID. And one of my colleagues at NCEA, Dr. Josh Packard, likes to talk about the idea of children of this generation growing up fast and slow at the same time. So we have this toxic soup of content that we're handing our children today, very different than what we grew up with. That's a combination, on one hand, of seeing some really harmful things online too early. At the same time, we see an increase in risk aversion on the part of our students and children. And so again, they're delaying or deferring or not participating at all in many of these risky aversions or risky behaviors. One of my biggest concerns is they're not doing this as much as we like to believe that we've helped them be more virtuous, and that's the cause. Unfortunately, it's not that simple. Part of the reason that we're seeing less of these high-risk behaviors is also because we're seeing a reduction in social interaction itself. So societal bonds are weaker, and our students now are also reporting that they're persistently lonely, also in scarily high double-digit numbers. And also, we have a lot of things that we as the grown-ups are throwing at them that are taking away from their focus. So for our special needs students, as you're going to see, for our special learners, many of these problems are that much more accentuated, and we'll talk about that a little bit too. Any questions about anything I've shared so far before I go into the next section? And always, you can drop your questions in the chat as we go here. Always happy to answer questions on the fly or save them for the end.
0 is not available. At the tone, please record your message. Finish recording. You may hang up or press 1 for more audio.
Hey, Joanne, it's Ellen. Sorry I missed your call.
All right, so we're going to continue to talk about a book that I think that was very important, enough that I shared it with my NCEA team a year ago, called Stolen Focus. And there's a lot of things written on this topic, so it's not an exclusive book recommendation, but I think it does a really good job of framing what we're throwing at kids of this generation that's contributing a lot to this mental health decline. So we've got this broader context of a society that's underslept and overworked. We have a lot of technology that's competing for our time, and so our habits of work have changed. We're switching tasks every 3 minutes on average. We know that we're being tracked and monitored by social media sites. We know that there's levels of stress, as we saw in those earlier data, that create hypervigilance amongst adults and children alike. We've got questions about our diet. We've got questions about the broader environment, things that the Holy Father addressed in Laudato Si. So all of this has resulted in a serious strain on our attention spans, and that's true for adults and that's true for children. And so there's a lot of things going into this. I'm not going to dwell on this list, but what I do want to talk about is the idea that our children are not only isolated, they're also distracted, and they're bombarded with a lot of the wrong messages. And we're not really giving them a context to feel centered and settled and whole. These are things that have to happen for you to have a good attention span. So we need playtime for children. Adults need the opportunity to get into a flow state. That's a work state where you're uninterrupted and doing something in which you take joy. We know we need time for things like uninterrupted reading of books, not just scrolling online. There has to be meaning in tasks. We have to make sure that we have space for our children to let their minds wander. There needs to be room for exercise, for 8 hours of sleep, for good nutrition, and to have a sense of safety overall. As we saw from that earlier data, we are sorely lacking in this last point and lacking in it significantly. So the reason I draw attention to protecting our attention spans as such is that we have given our students a context in which it's really hard for them to focus. And without focus, they don't feel settled or safe. And without that, it's really hard to have much of a foundation to build on the rest of it. I mean, if you think of it, really we've created this massive social experiment for our kids over the last few years is how much do you have to isolate people and then give them the wrong tools while they're isolated to feel engaged for them to start having mental health challenges? And the answer is not very much. And for today's conference, I really want to emphasize this, that children with special needs are especially vulnerable to all of these trends. And really, I want to look at this as two layers, as one is the needs of our students, and then the other is the needs of their parents. So special needs students are at special risk for all of these challenges. And so if you look at the things that predispose a person to mental health challenges that go in hand with a lot of learning differences or learning disabilities, things like poor communication or sensory disability or physical illness, a limited range of coping strategies, if somebody is medicated or if there's a history of abuse. All of these things are major contributing factors to unsteady mental health. And a lot of our students who are special learners have some of these challenges right out of the gate. And so they do deserve that extra attention to these underlying factors. It's hard to build on anything without addressing these first. And then we can also consider the risk factors for their parents. And we've seen a lot of clinical data, and I'm sure you've seen it too from a lot of sources, that parents of children with special needs are more likely to be isolated, to be anxious, to be depressed, to face burnout. And so we know that all of these things that are affecting our students are also major contributing risk factors for their parents too. It's not an easy time to be a kid. It's also not an easy time to be a parent. So I've just thrown a lot of data at you that seems a little bit overwhelming. And the question for us is, what is to be done about this? So I had a physician many years ago tell me that when treating students who have things like significant learning differences or things like autism spectrum disorder or ADHD, every treatment that we can offer our kids for all of these contributing factors are only marginally effective for any one individual treatment. And so, without offering you medical advice or expertise in that area, I can tell you as a practical approach, and the data supports this, it takes a combination of a lot of little things to change the bigger picture for a student's outcomes overall. You know, every child is unique, and so that series of little things is going to be different for every kid. And I'm sure all of you have experienced this in working with your own children, that, you know, each child has a different set of needs, and it takes time to figure out what those needs are, especially for our special learners. And I think this is really important for us to, as parents, then be able to communicate to other people, other grown-ups in our children's lives trying to help them. It takes trying many, many, many things, little things in unison to see results improve for our students over time. So beyond addressing the challenges and then coming up with ways to work with our students, again, a series of small decisions or a large number of small decisions around a bunch of challenges, behavioral interventions, medical interventions, support, time, space, all these things we've discussed. I think that all of these are happening in the context of broader social bonds between us, our students and children, and the communities that serve them. One of the phenomena of the modern age is disaffiliation from the institutions that defined earlier generations. So we've all heard about this, that people, especially kids, aren't going to school, or sorry, going to church in the same numbers that they did pre-COVID. And that was just really an acceleration of a trend that had been happening for decades. Something like 65 million Americans have exited organized religion, for example, in the last 20 years. And things like Rotary or other service clubs are way down as well. So especially as part of our American culture, people found a way to engage with each other in these networks or these communities that were faith communities or service communities. And so there's always been a lot of capital that we've built through all of these different little groups with which, or communities with which we'd be involved. So we'd have a church group, there's youth groups and clubs. Adults would have their groups, again, like Rotary or sewing circles, or all of these different ways that you're with a discrete community and building capital with them. So these bonds have weakened for everybody over the past decades. And we know that for our kids with special needs, this is an especially large risk. It's very hard to find that place to fit for a lot of kids and their families looking to support them. You know, I think the good news is that especially over the last decade, we've seen a real uptick in structured, formal social groups or skills groups that are there to help our students build engagement and community with each other. So I think of groups that I've worked with before that serve teenage students, for example, giving kids that maybe didn't have a lot of support or other social opportunities to engage a safe environment in which they could participate with each other. If anything, I see an increasing need for us to offer this to our special needs kids. We've also seen a decline in engagement from our neurotypical students as well. I mean, this isn't just a special needs problem. Our students need more social capital and more support in interacting in groups in general. So, bringing this full circle, what does all this data about mental health mean for schools? And this first slide is about schools in general, public, private, sectarian, non-sectarian. What does this mean in my mind for American education in general? I think the first thing that we have to consider is that, again, we have these chronic underlying trends, things that have been getting worse or presenting challenges for a long time. And then we have the acute problems. So in terms of chronic challenges, I see us only needing ever greater support for especially special needs kids. I also think that our curricula need to address that question of attention spans and social engagement for everybody. These challenges aren't just limited to special learners. In terms of the acute challenges of the day, schools really do need to be better trained and better prepared for mental health crises. Intervention is possible, training is possible, and it does work. There's things that we can do here. I see us needing to make a broad investment as educators in making sure that there's greater training and understanding in this area. I think that all schools, Catholic or not, need to continue to invest in plans and programs for special learners that do have more focus on their mental health needs as part of the program design itself. So it's very hard to separate these things. You might have academic intervention plans, the mental health issues. Uh, our schools in Arlington are doing a lot to try to resource these things together. It's only going to accelerate, and it's only going to be more and more necessary for younger kids. We saw a lot of our special learner programs start at the high school level. More and more elementary schools need similar programs too. Finally, I think that for everybody in the country, that these opportunities for authentic community, both for parents and our students, have to be out in front as an actual need, as a societal need. So the infrastructure is there: church, service clubs, youth groups, service groups. There's not as much appetite to participate in these. And so in many ways, this is some of the lowest hanging fruit. Get involved, get engaged, find a supportive group in which you can build capital and build purpose. What does this mean then for our Catholic schools, going really narrow? So I'd like to first offer this. I think that our schools need to focus on activities that help cultivate a deep focus. Kids have a lot of things thrown at them right now, and especially for our Catholic schools, the vision of us being an oasis amongst all the noise, I think is one that resonates with parents, certainly resonates with us as your educators. And I think that this has to be an ever more obvious part of our mission. I think it was always built into our DNA, but I think we have to be explicit about it now. I think that we need to not just view these challenges through our school's lens or our community lens, but really our faith community lens. There's so many things that we offer as the church that can counterbalance all of these negative trends, especially if we use the church, not just different church ministries, but really think of that as a holistic approach, that truly we're trying to bring Jesus to the hearts of our students. We need to really be intentional about connecting with youth, not just as a school priority, but as a church priority. I think another really important thing for us to discuss in each of our church communities is that parents can't afford to carry this burden entirely on their own. As you know, the cost of intervention is very high, and scaffolding upon learning or mental health support on top of learning support makes it that just greater an investment or more complex. I really think that this is a discussion for the entire church about what community investment looks like. In some jurisdictions, we're lucky enough to have programs available in which things like public dollars or health insurance dollars might support our students in these challenges. But that's not true everywhere. So I think that this is really looking at the big picture nationally, a community by community discussion. I also think that for us as the grown-ups in the schools, our mindset must continue to evolve. That we do carry a message of servant leadership to our students, and it's very important for us to always hold that out as our gold standard as well. We've seen a movement in our schools beyond a narrower college prep focus over the past decades, and I think that's only going to accelerate. What do I mean by that? I don't think that our high schools are going to stop being college prep as such, but I do think that if we look at our Catholic community in terms of being a universal community, our schools are taking on more and more students and more programs that move beyond that traditional post-war vision of college prep, everybody going to a 4-year college and getting a bachelor's degree. We have new learning pathways that are really great for a wide variety of learners. And we have a lot of learners that we want to have in our schools for community reasons that would not necessarily be great candidates for traditional 4-year college education. And so I think that for us as a Catholic system, looking at college prep, yes, it's a great way to support most students in getting into and staying on that middle class trajectory, but it's not the only way, and it's not the only reason we operate our schools. Yeah, and thank you, Lorraine. Happy to discuss more your thoughts here in a moment because we're close to wrapping up. Finally, the last thought I wanted to offer is that we have to be very vigilant about loneliness. Amongst all of these mental health challenges, I think that loneliness is that key common theme. Kids feel isolated, they feel alone. We have an answer for that. It's Jesus Christ. And I really think that Matthew 18 and the story of the shepherd leaving the 99 to find the one gets to the heart of God's love and how he interacts with us amongst all of this loneliness that seems so prevalent. May seem irrational to leave that 99 to find the one until that one is you. And so I think that really cultivating that deeper sense of empathy and God's love for each of our kids is the first step in toward looking at this broader sense of loneliness. I mean, we run faith communities first and foremost, and no student in our schools should feel alone. And I think this is a spiritual commitment and one that we are prepared to tackle if we tackle it together. So those were my formal remarks. I know I just shared a lot of information with you. I'm very happy to open the floor to questions right now. Lorraine, I know you had a comment there, but anybody have anything they'd like me to follow up on? I do want to emphasize, we're very blessed to be in this diocese. Bishop Burbidge has made a really comprehensive investment with partners like Porto Charities and other supporters to make sure that there is that next level of support in our schools. So Nancy's question, how do we change? I think if we look at what we've actually done here in Arlington, this is a wonderful model to look at how we do change, because I do believe that what we're doing in Arlington is making the difference. We do see high levels of participation in the sacraments and observance in church life. We do see a wholehearted effort to make sure that our schools every year are expanding the circle a little bit more of the learners we can serve and reach. So yeah, Nancy, there's no one magic bullet to fix all of these things, but a lot of little things in concert can make things better over time. I really think that not that our work is anywhere near done in this diocese, but this diocese has certainly moved the needle because we've had leaders recognize and commit to advancing the problem. It's part of the reason we're blessed to be together here today.
I just want to comment and thank you. This has been great. I'm an actual educator in a school in Front Royal, Virginia, and I've been getting involved with NCEA for a while now and really loving everything I'm hearing. Diane Elliott's been a great resource. You hit such key points because as an educator, I'm actually the head of school. It's interesting how many parents and people all know the problems that we're facing, but then the actual implementation on what to do is just like the comment, how can we change? And it is a mindset change, just even moving from servant leadership beyond college prep, where that's important to educate our kids, but the whole focusing on the whole child, understanding every aspect that needs to be hit. We've seen as educators that have stayed in education post-pandemic how important it is to really build communities and really build support groups and really build the right professional development as teachers are looking for that actually involve that, so that we're not just hitting great benchmarks, but we're serving all the students that we have. At the school I'm at, we do have an inclusion program that focuses on belonging, and we've been doing it for a while, but I'm learning more and more since the pandemic how important it is to have that support group and know that we can watch the child and know that every child is different. One strategy might not work for all, but I'm very thankful for all NCAA's done for what's happening at the schools out in Northern Virginia, and I'm learning a lot, but I'm also very grateful for your talk, just knowing that you're hitting key points that educators would all be saying amen. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you. That question, what can be done? And this is a very modest step, but I think it's a profound one. If you look at the numbers, so if you look at two children, two teenagers sitting side by side, one of them is going to be profoundly lonely statistically. And everybody feels loneliness and alienation as part of being human, but I mean like lonely. We've really set them up for a world in which that loneliness is endemic. So when you're working with kids, assume that most of the ones you're going to be working with feel that profound sense of loneliness. And a lot of the disconnect starts right there. So just keep that in mind. How do you help bring them into a community where they don't have to feel lonely anymore? So we have some other questions here too. Are model programs to the schools and churches recognized and how? So a lot of our schools have implemented individual support plans. There are all sorts of little things that educators are doing, both formal and informal. So our high schools, for example, Bishop Ireton O'Connell, JP2, or PVI, they all have scaffolded programs. And so we have educators that are working with the kids where they're at, trying to get them into the right program academically, but then working with counseling departments to make sure that they're identifying needs and building a bridge. So more of that and investment in more of that for all of our schools is really important. Our elementary schools vary from school to school in terms of what they offer. Some have really robust programs, others don't yet. But I think that every school recognizing they're going to have to invest more resource in addressing exactly these challenges is really important. If you're in a school community, just know that that takes an investment. And so it's going to be working with the local school board or with the local parish to make sure that you're asking these questions at that level and also helping provide solutions. How do we get things like more positions or more counseling positions or more intervention positions funded? How do we fund a youth group where kids have opportunities? Yeah, so Ellen, there's a lot of programs out there, no one model program, but I am sure that our educators on the call today right here in Arlington are going to be able to list a lot of things that they're doing that add up to change. So Gabriella, comprehensive suicide plan. So I'm not a suicide prevention expert, and so I don't want to speak too much to specific plans, other than to say there's a lot of them out there. And so speaking broadly, I reported some statistics on things like suicidal ideation, but that moving from being a broader sentiment to actually taking action, when a child is in crisis, data says that it's a pretty narrow window, and there's particular ways to help intervene during that really narrow window of crisis to make sure that that outcome is averted. And so there's resources in every town, including the Diocese of Arlington, that can offer support in suicide prevention. There's hotlines available, and counselors are trained in these things. I think that for all educators, receiving more training and identifying these signs is going to be really important as this challenge continues to grow. All right, anything else? Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Lincoln. I'd like to remind you all that at 1:30 we will resume the program in room 3 with the high school panel. So we'll see you all there.
Thanks, everybody. God bless.